You're watching the Thursday edition of Primetime News. Good evening and many thanks for joining us for another insightful newscast. I'm Michael Madiba. As promised, we're tracking the emergence of the H1N1 virus, also known as swine flu, in the country. And on Wednesday, the Ministry of Health and Social Services revealed that a total of 54 cases have so far been confirmed countrywide. Marco Ndlovu filed the story.
According to a media release made available to the Namibia Press Agency on Wednesday, the ministry said out of 190 suspected cases countrywide, Oshotho-Njupha region recorded 24 out of 37 suspected cases, Khomas recorded 24 out of 138 suspected cases, and Kavango East recorded 6 out of 15 suspected cases. The statement says the cases were reported from July 2022 up to date, of which some have been investigated for COVID-19 but tested negative. The ministry continues with surveillance activities across the country in this regard, the statement said. It, however, played down fears of an outbreak, saying there is no H1N1 or swine flu outbreak in Namibia, but rather an increase in the seasonal influenza A H1N1 cases, and this is expected. Selima Shimwefeleni reporting for Nampa News.
Staying atop of health matters, the Ministry of Health and Social Services has announced an increase in cases of schistosomiasis, also known as bilharzia, in the Kavango West region. Sawi Hausiku is tracking developments in the region and compiled this insert.
The ministry's executive director, Ben Nangobe, said in a media statement on Wednesday that 608 suspected cases were reported, of which 173 were confirmed both clinically and 139 via laboratory tests, while 34 cases are being investigated. He said school-going children are the most affected, adding the ministry continues to conduct surveillance activities and all the cases were managed as outpatients and none was hospitalized due to schistosomiasis. Schistosomiasis, also known as bilharzia, is an infectious acute and chronic disease caused by parasitic flatworms, which are transmitted when individuals come into contact with water contaminated with snails that carry the worms. For Nampa TV, Linnea Dishena.
Moving on to fraternal relations. Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of International Relations and Cooperation Netumbo Nandi-Ndaitwah has implored Namibian and Zambian senior officials to finalize the Memorandum of Understanding on border passes for border residents. From the Irongo region, Isabel Bento compiled this report.
This, according to Nandi-Ndaitwah, holds great potential for the advancement of regional tourism, sustainable management of shared natural resources, and community empowerment. Nandi-Ndaitwah was speaking during the 10th session of the political and diplomatic consultations of the Namibia-Zambia Joint Permanent Commission of Cooperation taking place in Swakopmund. The two-day session is aimed at creating a platform not to only review the implementation of the agreements that the two countries have reached so far, but also to further plan concrete activities for socio-economic development in order to respond more effectively to the needs and the aspirations of the two countries' inhabitants. Nandi-Ndaitwah said Zambia is an important trade link for Namibia in the Southern African Development Community, and of all the dry ports at the port of Walvis Bay, the Zambian dry port is the most active in terms of volumes, with containerized imports continuing to account for over 60% of all transit cargo via the dry port. Selima Shimwefeleni reporting for Nampa News.
On to matters concerning education. Minister of Education, Arts and Culture Ana Ngipondoka on Wednesday noted teacher leadership and innovation should be encouraged in Namibia in order to steer educational transformation for the betterment of the country's education sector. Shelva Wills filed this insert.
Ngipondoka made the remarks in a press release issued in honor of World Teachers' Day under the theme, "The Transformation of Education Begins with Teachers." She said while the focus is always placed on learners in terms of what and how they should learn, World Teachers' Day reminds Namibian of the teachers' individual talents and abilities which must be sustained through collaboration and support. Teachers, the minister noted, have played and must continue to play a central role in reconfiguring the ministry's new social contract for the sake of education, the shared futures, and the country's social-economic development. For Nampa TV, Linnea Dishena.
When we return, Fisheries Ministry to embark on employment verification audit. Welcome to Primetime Biz, where business and economics take center stage. We begin the segment with the local extractive sector. The Ministry of Fisheries and Marine Resources, as a remedial intervention, will, after the completion of an employment verification audit, strategize how affected anglers can find active duty employment within the industry. More from this report.
As an additional measure, the Ministry of Fisheries and Marine Resources is planning to conduct a verification audit to establishing the total number of fishermen employed under the Government Employment Redress Program who have not taken up active employment, meaning being paid while not in full active service, with a view to look at new modalities of finding them active duty employment. It is in the midst of all these developments that the Ministry of Fisheries and Marine Resources became alive to the fact that there are companies without fishing quota operating in Walvis Bay, luring some of these employees to joining their companies under prospects of better salaries that birthed the mass resignation from 4 companies, namely Kavema Fishing Pty Limited, joint venture Compasato Investment Pty Limited, and Veneer Investment Pty Limited, and Odago Fishing Pty Limited, joint venture, and the Kusep Fishing Enterprises Limited. The Ministry of Fisheries and Marine Resources attempted to dissuade the resigning employees from uncoupling from their allocated companies, but these pleas fell on deaf ears. The total number of fishermen employed by the 2 companies were 635 and 612, have tendered their resignation. Honourable Speaker, honourable members, there seems to exist a flawed understanding and perception among some of the affected fishermen that the fishing quota against which the employment of the affected employees has been secured is and remains the property of the affected workers, and further that these quotas are transferable to wherever the employees want it to go. Obviously, that understanding negates the government's objective of ensuring employment for the affected workers and maintenance of stability and job tenure security in the fishing industry.
Moving on, the National Agricultural Outlook Conference for 2022, aimed at discussing the state of affairs of the sector in the country, officially kicked off in the capital on Wednesday.
In fact, the conference is taking place at a critical juncture as regards the expectations on the sector to increasingly deliver better outcomes on the socio-economic development objectives of the country and beyond the usual course of business. I want to share 4 fundamental themes of action for the sector that emerges at this point in time. First, it is the revitalization of agriculture as a priority sector for inclusive growth, food self-sufficiency and security, an anchor for economic progression and social transformation over the long term. Secondly, the urgency for policy reprioritization in the sector as a sustainable pathway for building back better amidst the lessons learned from the COVID pandemic and the ongoing Ukraine-Russia war, and the consequent plan of action to realize the objectives nationally. Third, investments in a secure water supply, distribution and effective stewardship of water resources are a cornerstone of economic and social progression, without which no economic or social development is possible.
That's all the top news we had for you this evening. Stay tuned for the business and economics roundup, followed by the weather forecast. Welcome to Sport Planet, where sport in action is the order of the day. Under-20 national football team coach James Breeds announced the final 20 players set to compete in the Under-20 COSAFA 2022 Championship, scheduled to take place in Eswatini between the 6th and the 16th of October. Now, the under-20 squad has been in camp since the 10th of September and departed for Eswatini on Wednesday via South Africa. In 2020, Namibia finished as runners-up after losing 1-0 to Mozambique in the final. Speaking to Nampa recently, Breeds said the aim was to display an improved performance and win the crown. The 8th edition of the Hage Geingob Cup was officially launched in the capital on Wednesday as the tournament was moved to rugby from its original football format. The Welviches will play South Africa's Griquas, who have 2 Namibian players in their squad, on the 5th of November 2022 at the Hage Geingob Stadium. Announcing the change at the launch, the chairperson of the organizers, Amos Chiuka, said they decided to move the cup from football to rugby as a means to assist the Welviches prepare for next year's 2023 Rugby World Cup. I actually did struggle with the pronunciation of the South African team, but thanks to my producer, hopefully I got it right. Stand by for your sports roundup. With the sports news, we've come to the end of tonight's edition. Many thanks for watching. Do make a date with us tomorrow for the week's last edition of your informative newscast. From myself, Michael Madimba, and the entire production crew, it's good night.